Daniel Reeves had been a liaison officer for exactly 8 months, and in that time he'd learned that observing cultural practices was diplomatic code for watching things that make you uncomfortable while keeping your mouth shut. Today's assignment was testing that principle to its limits. The ceremonial hall of the Kyrathi war complex could hold 5,000 people when filled to capacity. Today it held maybe 3,000. Kyrathi warriors in formal armor, human observers in diplomatic attire, and approximately 200 Verath prisoners lined up in ceremonial chains waiting to be formally transferred to their new owners. The Kyrathi called it integration ceremony. The human diplomatic corps called it post-war claiming ritual. Everyone else called it what it was, the spoils of war being distributed like prizes among the victors. Daniel stood with the other human observers, taking notes on datapad, documenting everything as ordered. Earth's alliance with the Kyrathi Empire was only 3 years old, forged during the war against the Verath Dominion that had ended 6 months ago. The alliance was valuable. The Kyrathi had advanced technology, established trade routes, political influence that Earth desperately needed to establish itself in the larger galactic community. So when the Kyrathi had cultural practices that made humans uncomfortable, the orders were clear. Observe, document, don't interfere. Cultural relativism was important. Earth needed this alliance. Daniel repeated that to himself while watching prisoners in chains being handed over to warriors like property being transferred between owners. The Kyrathi were a warrior culture. That much was obvious from every aspect of their society. They were tall, imposing, with elongated ears that could track sounds humans couldn't hear and skin that shifted through colors, communicating complex emotions and status. Their civilization was ancient, their traditions refined over millennia of conflict and conquest. One of those traditions was claiming rights, the practice that victorious warriors could claim prisoners of value as personal property, integrated into their households through formalized bonds that the Kyrathi insisted were nothing like slavery, but looked disturbingly similar to human observers. The ceremony had been proceeding for 2 hours. Prisoner after prisoner brought forward their designated claimer, stepping up to accept the ceremonial chains, speaking ritual words of binding, formalizing the transfer of ownership under Kyrathi law. Most of the prisoners were Verath, the species the Kyrathi had been fighting, similar to the Kyrathi in many biological ways but politically opposed. The war had been brutal. The Verath had lost. Now Verath prisoners were being distributed among Kyrathi victors according to complex rules about rank, achievement in battle, and political favor. Daniel watched it all, took his notes, kept his expression neutral, and tried not to think too hard about what he was documenting. Then they brought forward prisoner 2847. The designation told Daniel nothing. Prisoners were numbered rather than named in official proceedings, their individual identities subsumed into their status as claimed property. But something about this particular prisoner made him pay closer attention. She was young, probably mid-20s in human equivalent years, with the typical Verath physiology. Tall, slender, elongated ears bearing minimal decoration. Skin currently showing deep crimson that Daniel's limited cultural training suggested meant defiance or strong emotion. Most of the prisoners he'd watched showed resignation in their skin colors and postures, acceptance of their fate, submission to the inevitable. This one walked into the hall with her head up, her ears held in what looked like a deliberately aggressive position, her skin that defiant crimson despite the ceremonial chains binding her wrists and connecting to a collar at her throat. The announcer read her designation and brief history in formal Kyrathi. Prisoner 2847, Verath military, rank of squadron leader, captured during the assault on Station Thelvar. Claimed by Commander Vethros under warrior's privilege, confirmed by the Council of Victors. Commander Vethros stepped forward from the assembled warriors. A high-ranking officer whose ears bore extensive decorations indicating significant combat achievements and political status. His skin was the confident gold of someone who'd earned considerable respect. He spoke the ritual words in Kyrathi, which Daniel's translator implant rendered as, "I claim this prisoner as spoils of war, to serve my household according to tradition and law. I accept responsibility for her conduct and integration. I bind her to my authority as witnessed by this assembly." Standard claiming language that Daniel had heard dozens of times already today. The guards, 2 Kyrathi warriors in ceremonial armor, moved to complete the transfer. They were supposed to physically hand the prisoner's chains to Vethros, symbolizing the transfer of control from military custody to personal ownership. But when they tried to position prisoner 2847 for the transfer, she resisted. Not violently. She was clearly smart enough not to try physical rebellion while chained and surrounded by armed Kyrathi. But she refused to lower her head into the submissive posture that ceremony apparently required. She stood straight, meeting Vethros's eyes directly, her skin that aggressive crimson. "Kneel," one of the guards commanded in Kyrathi. She didn't kneel. Her skin shifted darker, absolute defiance in a color so intense it was almost black-red. Commander Vethros's skin flashed irritation orange. "Make her kneel. The ceremony requires proper posture." The guards moved to force her down, one hand going to her shoulder to push while the other maintained grip on the chains. That's when Daniel made a decision that would probably end his career as liaison officer and possibly cause a significant diplomatic incident. "Wait," he said, his voice carrying across the ceremonial space despite not being amplified. 3,000 people turned to look at the human who just interrupted a sacred Kyrathi claiming ceremony. Daniel felt his heart hammering against his ribs, but he kept his voice steady as he addressed Commander Vethros directly. "Commander, I request permission to address the assembly regarding this prisoner." The silence in the hall was profound. Not the respectful quiet of ceremony, but the shocked silence of 3,000 people processing something unexpected and possibly offensive. Commander Vethros's skin shifted through colors rapidly: confusion purple, irritation orange, assessment blue. His ears tilted in the position Daniel had learned meant intense scrutiny. "This is not human concern," Vethros said, his voice carrying formal displeasure. "This is Kyrathi tradition, witnessed according to our law. You are observer, not participant." "I understand that, Commander," Daniel replied, trying to keep his voice respectful while his brain screamed at him to shut up and sit down. "But I have information about this prisoner that may be relevant to the claiming." What information could a human liaison officer have about a Verath prisoner captured in combat? Another voice, one of the senior Kyrathi officials presiding over the ceremony. Daniel was improvising now, building a lie based on nothing but desperate need to stop what was happening. "I recognize her from pre-war intelligence briefings. Prisoner 2847. He gestured to the woman still standing defiant despite the guards' attempts to force her down, was listed in Earth intelligence files as a Verath squadron leader. Yes. But she was also flagged as resistance fighter, who opposed the Verath Dominion's aggressive expansion policies. This was complete fabrication. Daniel had no idea who this prisoner was beyond the designation announced minutes ago. But he delivered the lie with enough confidence that people hesitated. The briefing notes indicated she helped evacuate civilian populations during border conflicts before the full war started, including some Kyrathi civilians who were caught in contested zones. She risked her own military career to prioritize civilian safety over Dominion orders. Vethros's ears shifted position slightly. Interest or doubt, Daniel couldn't tell which. If this is true, why was she captured during combat operations? Because she was still Verath military, Daniel improvised. Still bound by duty to her people even if she disagreed with Dominion policies. But the intelligence assessment was that she fought defensively rather than aggressively, protected her forces rather than pursuing conquest. He was making this up as he went, But watching enough of these ceremonies had taught him that Kyrathi culture valued honor and principle. If he could reframe this prisoner as someone who acted according to Kyrathi values despite being on the opposing side. If what you say is true, Daniel continued, then claiming her as war prize might dishonor the very principles the Kyrathi fight for. You wage war to protect the innocent and punish aggressors. She did the same thing on a smaller scale within the constraints of her own military service. Claiming her as property would be claiming an ally, not an enemy. The prisoner, 2847, was staring at Daniel with an expression he couldn't read. Surprise, maybe, or calculation, trying to figure out what game he was playing and whether to go along with it. Vethros looked uncertain now, his skin shifting to contemplative blue. You say she acted as ally despite serving enemy forces. I say she acted according to principles that the Kyrathi themselves respect, Daniel replied. She prioritized protecting innocent lives over following aggressive orders. She helped civilians who needed aid regardless of their species. That the circumstances of war put her on the opposing side doesn't change that her actions align with Kyrathi values about honor and protection of the defenseless. Several of the senior officials were conferring quietly, their skin colors suggesting serious consideration of what Daniel had said. If your information is accurate, one of them finally spoke, then this prisoner should not be claimed as conquest prize. She should be released as allied individual mistakenly captured in the confusion of combat. Exactly, Daniel agreed, not believing his desperate bluff was actually working. Vethros studied the prisoner with new assessment. Is what the human says true? Did you oppose Dominion aggression? Did you protect civilians? She held his gaze for a long moment. Then, apparently deciding that whatever this human was doing offered better outcome than being claimed as property, she nodded. I served in military because service was required, but I opposed Dominion policies of expansion through aggression. I protected civilian populations when I could. I evacuated non-combatants from conflict zones when my superiors ordered scorched earth tactics. I did not choose this war. I tried to minimize its harm. It was probably not the complete truth. Daniel doubted anyone reached squadron leader rank while openly defying orders. But it was enough truth mixed with his fabrication to create reasonable doubt about her status as enemy prize. Vethros considered for what felt like an eternity. His skin cycled through complex colors, contemplation, reassessment, decision-making. Then, if she is ally mistakenly captured rather than enemy rightfully claimed, then my claim is void. I release all rights to this prisoner under warrior's privilege. He gestured to the guards. Remove the chains. She is free to return to her people or seek refuge as she chooses. The guards looked uncertain. This was clearly not standard procedure, but when Vethros repeated the command with more authority, they moved to comply. One of them pulled out the ceremonial keys that would unlock the restraints. Daniel felt relief washing over him. He'd successfully interrupted a claiming ceremony, fabricated intelligence to reframe a prisoner's status, and somehow managed not to cause complete diplomatic catastrophe. The prisoner would go free. That was what mattered. That's when she spoke, her voice clear and carrying across the hall. I invoke Vel'kethara. Every Kyrathi in the hall froze. The guards stopped mid-motion, keys halfway to the locks. Vethros's skin flashed through multiple colors too quickly to track. The officials looked shocked. The prisoner turned to face Daniel directly, her skin shifting to colors he didn't recognize, but that clearly meant something profoundly significant to every Kyrathi watching. The human spoke for me when no one else would, she said formally, still in Kyrathi though Daniel's implant was translating. The human challenged tradition and authority to offer freedom rather than claim ownership. The human saw me as person with agency and worth rather than prize to be distributed among victors. She held out her wrists, still bound by the ceremonial chains that the guards had stopped removing. I invoke Vel'kethara. I claim the ancient right to choose my bond rather than accepting what others assign. If I am to be bound to anyone, I choose to bind myself to the one who offered freedom without demanding submission in return. Daniel had absolutely no idea what was happening, but the reaction from every Kyrathi in the hall told him it was monumentally significant. Skin colors were shifting through patterns he'd never seen: shock, approval, profound respect, and something that looked almost like awe. "What is Vel'kethara?" he managed to ask, his voice sounding small in the vast ceremonial space. An elderly Kyrathi official stepped forward from the assembly, someone whose ears bore so many decorations that they must have weighed significantly, whose skin bore the subtle discoloration that came with extreme age for their species. When he spoke, his voice carried authority built from decades, or perhaps centuries of experience. Vel'kethara is ancient law, predating the current Kyrathi Empire by millennia. It exists to prevent the permanent bondage of those who deserve freedom. When someone in chains is offered release without condition, without claim of ownership, without demand for submission or service, they gain the right to invoke Vel'kethara. He gestured to the prisoner, who still held her wrists extended toward Daniel, chains still locked but the gesture clearly symbolic. "This female has declared that you freed her without demanding anything in return. You challenged authority to offer her freedom rather than accepting her distribution as property. This grants her the right under ancient law to choose her own bond rather than accepting assignment to another." The official's skin shifted to deep respect blue. "She has chosen you, not as owner but as covenant partner. It transforms the relationship from ownership to partnership, from conquest to mutual agreement, from property to person. It is the highest honor in our culture, to be chosen by someone you freed rather than claimed." "I don't understand," Daniel said, his brain struggling to process. "I just wanted her to be free. I don't want to own anyone. I don't want her to be bound to me, if that means she's not actually free." "That is exactly why she chose you," the official explained patiently. "Because you offered freedom rather than claiming ownership. Vel'kethara is not about ownership. It is about choosing partnership with one who has demonstrated they will respect agency and autonomy. It is voluntary bond rather than forced servitude." The prisoner, who Daniel desperately needed to learn the actual name of, spoke again, her eyes meeting his. "Will you unlock the chains?" It was a test, Daniel realized, the final confirmation. If he refused, he'd be rejecting the bond she was offering. If he took the keys from the guards and unlocked her himself, he'd be accepting. What? Partnership, covenant, some kind of relationship defined by Kyrathi law that he didn't fully understand. He looked at her, really looked at her. Saw someone who'd fought in a war she apparently didn't believe in, who'd been captured despite trying to protect civilians, who'd been about to be claimed as property by a warrior she didn't choose, who just used the only agency available to her to claim something different. "What's your name?" he asked. Her skin flickered, surprise, then something warmer. "Sira, Sira Verath, formerly squadron leader, currently invoking the oldest law I know to claim freedom through choice rather than accepting bondage through conquest. Daniel held out his hand to the guard who'd been about to unlock her restraints. After a moment's hesitation, the guard placed the ceremonial keys in Daniel's palm. The metal was warm, heavier than it looked, ornate with decorations that probably held cultural significance Daniel didn't understand. He approached Sira, keenly aware that every eye in the hall was watching this moment. "I'm Daniel Reeves, human liaison officer, currently improvising and hoping I don't accidentally commit to something I don't understand." He tried for a slight smile. "But if this means you get to choose freedom instead of being property, then yes. I'll unlock the chains." He fitted the first key to the locks at her wrists. The mechanism was complex, requiring specific movements before it would release. The guards had probably practiced this hundreds of times. Daniel fumbled with it, aware of how undignified this probably looked. Sira stood perfectly still, patient, while he worked out how the locks functioned. Finally, the mechanism clicked and the wrist restraints fell away. Then the collar. The chains hit the floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the silent hall. For a moment, Sira just stood there, rubbing her wrists where the restraints had left marks on her skin, not deep, but visible evidence of how long she'd been bound. Then she reached out and grabbed Daniel's wrist. Not gently, not tentatively. A firm grip that felt like claiming rather than requesting permission. Every Kyrathi in the hall inhaled sharply. "Vel'kethara is witnessed," Sira said formally, her voice carrying across the space. "I choose this bond. I choose this partner. I choose freedom that does not demand submission and partnership that does not require domination. Let it be recorded that Sira Verath claims covenant with Daniel Reeves, who offered freedom without price and saw worth without conquest." The elderly official nodded gravely. "Vel'kethara is confirmed and witnessed by this assembly. The bond is recognized under ancient law. It supersedes claiming rights, military authority, and all other obligations previously assigned." He looked at Daniel with an expression that might have been approval or sympathy, hard to tell. "You came to this ceremony as liaison officer. You leave as covenant partner to one who chose you for the rarest of reasons. You offered what conquerors rarely give, freedom without demanding submission in return." Daniel was still processing this when Sira's grip on his wrist tightened slightly. She leaned closer, speaking quietly enough that only he could hear. "Thank you, for seeing person instead of prize. For offering freedom when you could have simply watched me be claimed. For being worth choosing." "I just couldn't watch you be property," Daniel replied honestly. "It felt wrong." "I know. That's precisely why I chose you instead of accepting what they were assigning me." She released his wrist but didn't step away. "Vel'kethara is binding covenant. I am free from all conquest claims, but bound by my own choice to partnership with you. This is not ownership. This is mutual agreement. Do you understand?" "Not really," Daniel admitted. "But I understand that you chose this, and I'm honored that you felt I was worth choosing. I promise I'll learn what this actually means and try not to mess it up too badly." "You'll learn," Sira said, and there was something almost like warmth in her skin color now. "Vel'kethara is complicated, but it starts simply. You freed me without claiming me. I claimed you without dominating you. We are bound by mutual respect rather than conquered necessity. Everything else we figure out together." "That seems better than the alternative," Daniel observed. "Infinitely better," Sira agreed. The ceremony continued after that. Other prisoners were brought forward. Other warriors claimed their prizes according to tradition. But Daniel and Sira stood apart from it now, bound by something different than what the ceremony was designed to formalize. The Kyrathi officials provided Daniel with documentation explaining Vel'kethara in terms his translator could properly process. What he learned was both fascinating and slightly terrifying. Vel'kethara created a covenant bond recognized across Kyrathi culture as more significant than marriage, military service, or political alliance. It was partnership based on demonstrated mutual respect, one party offering freedom without claim, the other choosing bond without coercion. Both parties retained complete autonomy and agency, but were bound by obligation to support and protect each other according to their capabilities. In practical terms, it meant Sira was now legally protected under Kyrathi law as Daniel's covenant partner, rather than available for claiming as war prize. She had all the rights of Kyrathi citizenship despite being Verath, because the covenant partnership extended Daniel's diplomatic status to her. It also meant Daniel was now responsible for Sira's integration into galactic society, her welfare and protection, and ensuring she had resources and opportunities to rebuild her life post-war. So basically, Daniel said to Sira later, after they'd left the ceremonial hall and found a quiet space to talk, I accidentally acquired a partner by trying to help you avoid being property, and now we're bound by ancient alien law that neither of us fully understands but that everyone else takes extremely seriously. That's reasonably accurate summary, Sira agreed. Her skin had shifted to more relaxed colors now that they were away from the ceremony, soft blue that suggested calm mixed with cautious optimism. Though I would phrase it as, you offered freedom without strings, I claimed partnership on my own terms, and now we figure out what that actually means in practice. What does it mean for you? Daniel asked, practically. You're not claimed by Vethros or anyone else. You have citizenship rights, but where do you go? What do you do? That's part of what we figure out together, Sira replied. Vel'kethara doesn't dictate specific arrangements. It just establishes that we're partners, equals who have chosen to bind ourselves to mutual support and protection. How that works in practice is up to us. She studied him thoughtfully. What were you planning to do after your liaison assignment ended? Return to Earth, probably. Report on Kyrathi cultural practices. Maybe teach at the diplomatic academy about first contact protocols. Daniel paused. Though after today's performance, I might not have a liaison career anymore. Interrupting sacred ceremonies is probably grounds for dismissal. You saved someone from bondage they didn't choose, Sira noted. If your superiors dismiss you for that, they don't deserve your service. That's idealistic, Daniel said, but probably not how military chains of command work. Then perhaps, Sira suggested, we find something else. Vel'kethara partners often work together, one's skills complementing the others. You have diplomatic training and cultural knowledge. I have military experience and tactical expertise. There are plenty of opportunities in the galaxy for a partnership like that. Daniel considered this. You want to work together, actually build something with this covenant instead of just treating it as legal protection that frees you from being property. You offered me freedom without demanding submission, Sira said. The least I can do is offer you partnership without demanding you give up your own autonomy. If we're bound by covenant, we might as well make it meaningful instead of just legal technicality. Over the following weeks, that's exactly what they did. Daniel's liaison assignment ended, not with dismissal, but with complicated discussions about his unprecedented invocation of Vel'kethara and what it meant for human-Kyrathi relations. Eventually, his superiors decided it was actually positive development. Humans demonstrating respect for Kyrathi law while also pushing against practices that looked uncomfortably like slavery. Sira used her newfound citizenship rights to access Verath refugees and help them navigate post-war integration. Her military background and experience with Kyrathi culture made her valuable liaison between refugee populations and Kyrathi authorities. Daniel and Sira worked together, true partnership built on the foundation of that moment when chains fell and agency was claimed. They advocated for refugee rights, helped establish integration programs, pushed for changes to claiming ceremonies that would give prisoners more agency in their own futures. 6 months after the ceremony, they were approached by the elderly Kyrathi official who'd explained Vel'kethara. Your partnership has been noticed, he told them. The way you've honored the covenant while also building something meaningful beyond legal requirement. You've shown what Vel'kethara was always meant to be, not just escape from bondage, but foundation for genuine partnership based on mutual respect. He paused. There are others, prisoners from various conflicts, people in situations where they face bondage or claiming but who deserve freedom and choice. Your advocacy work has helped some of them, but there are thousands more across Kyrathi territories. What are you suggesting? Sira asked. That you formalize what you're already doing. Create organization dedicated to helping those in bondage claim agency through Vel'kethara or similar laws across different cultures. You've proven it can work. Freedom offered without claim, partnership chosen without domination. Make that available to others who need it. It took another year to establish properly, but eventually they did. The Vel'kethara Initiative, dedicated to helping those facing bondage find paths to freedom and agency across galactic cultures. Daniel would look back on that moment in the ceremonial hall, when he'd improvised desperate lies to stop a claiming, when Sira had grabbed his wrist and claimed partnership on her own terms, as the moment his life shifted from observation to action. Do you ever regret it? He asked Sira during a quiet moment, years after that initial ceremony. Claiming partnership with someone you barely knew, binding yourself through covenant when you could have just taken freedom and gone your own way. Never, Sira replied. Her skin was warm gold. The color he'd learned meant deep contentment and satisfaction. You freed me without claiming me. That rare gift deserved acknowledgement. And partnership built on that foundation, on mutual respect and chosen bond rather than forced servitude. That's worth more than freedom alone. I'm glad you grabbed my wrist, Daniel said. I'm glad you unlocked the chains, Sira replied. They'd both been changed by that moment. Daniel from observer to actor, from passive witness to active participant. Sira from prisoner to partner, from claimed property to choosing agent. And from that single moment when control was refused and agency was claimed, they'd built something neither of them had expected. A partnership that transcended species, culture, and the circumstances of war. Because sometimes, the fiercest loyalty comes not from chains and conquest, but from the moment when chains are removed and choice remains. And true bonds begin the instant one person offers freedom without demanding submission, and another person claims partnership without requiring domination. That's what Vel'kethara meant. That's what Sira's grip on Daniel's wrist had declared. And that's what they'd built together. Freedom chosen, partnership claimed, and bonds formed through respect instead of conquest. The chains had fallen. The grip was chosen. And from that moment everything changed.